Alderwoman Behringer, Alderman Moore, Alderman Vaquero,
Present.
Alderman Cone,
Present.
Alderwoman Howard,
Present.
Alderwoman Ingracia, Chairwoman Krewson.
Here.
We have 4 present and we have a quorum.
Okay, this morning we have before us Board Bill number 2, which is the airport use agreement and use and lease agreement. That was the word I was struggling for there, lease. And so we have Rhonda Homnebrigger with us this morning. And would you like to introduce the members of your team and then present on this?
Rob Salarano. Rob is our properties manager and handles all the leases for the airport. He reports to Antonio Strong. Antonio Strong is our chief financial officer. And Amanda Jefferson is Antonio's assistant, so I think most of you have met Amanda through, she does all of our work now with the Board of Aldermen. I am going to give a presentation this morning, so I'll share that with you as well. For your records, it might be easier for everybody to go through. The use and lease agreement that's before you today is, we're excited about. We had a current use and lease agreement that was 5 years. That will expire this June 30th. So for the past year, we've been negotiating. Mario Pandolfo, who couldn't be with us because he had to be in Kansas City to present today to the FAA, was our lead on our use and lease agreement, and they've spent the better part of the last 10 months really on negotiating it. So we've come to agreement. It is before you today as the board. We have brought it to the Airport Commission last month. All of the airlines are also taking it through their legislative process. We have all of the signed documents back except from one carrier, which they tell us we should have here shortly. So
Rhonda, if I could just, for one thing, this document does what? This signs up the airlines for
a 5-year commitment.
5-year, and there are both airlines that pay,
Signatory rates,
thank you.
and then there's airlines that choose to be non-signatory. The majority of our airlines, when they sign the use and lease agreement, it's a commitment that they will operate here for the next 5 years or pay the money thereof. So, we feel very good about it. This is one of the agreements, when we started negotiating this, as I was speaking with Alderman Vaquero a while ago, a lot of airlines, for years, there were these long-term 30 and 40-year agreements. Those have kind of gone by the wayside. The past 2 agreements, we came off of a 40-year agreement at the airport. The past 2 were 5-year agreements. This one going forward's 5 years. We looked at a possibility of a 10-year, and the airlines were okay looking at a 10-year. That's got pros and cons to it. What we looked at the end of the day was that for 5 years, our position is getting stronger every year, and as we go through this, you'll see some of the advantages. We really feel in 5 years that we'll be able to ask the airlines for even more. So we didn't want to lock into a 10-year. They were willing to do that, but they were also satisfactory looking at the 5-year, which is kind of standard right now. You are seeing some of the airports, as their agreements expire, you're seeing a few starting to enter the 10-year marks, but most are a 5 to 7 year average.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So if I may, we'll just start, if that's okay, Chairman?
Yep.
So, as I said, our first one expires on June the 30th. This one has been in place since July 1 of 2011. These are the airlines that choose to be signatories at the airport. It's all of our major carriers, and as I said, the staff was negotiating since May of last year. The new term of the agreement is 5 years. It'll run through July of 2016 up through June of 2021. It grants all of our signatory carriers the right to operate at the airport. It also commits them to $1 million guarantee, so through the life of that agreement. So if they didn't reach $1 million in payment to the airport, they would have to pay that to us. It also establishes the terms for using their space, what we require of them. It defines their lease premises. In front of you here is a booklet that has all of the lease premises in it, so we'll leave those with you as well. This next one is really exciting for us. We pre-approved a 5-year capital improvement plan. First time in probably the last 25 years that the airport has had a 5-year improvement plan. They have already pre-approved that. It's $170 million. It's over 100 projects. Some are small, some are big. That also includes some large equipment replacement like snow brooms, snow combos, and some fire trucks. But a big deal for us to get a pre-approval on that. We've been operating with a 1-year CIP that has been challenging, so we have a 5-year notice. It outlines the requirements for improvements that they are required to make. It also provides the requirements for insurance. It allocates maintenance requirements. It continues the rate mitigation, this 13.7 that we have brought before you for at least the 5 years that I've been in here, 6 now, I guess. This is where we take money from our debt service reserve fund, transfer it so that there is a less cost that the airlines can pay initially, and then we transfer it back at the end of the year. So it's been this transfer in and out, but what it does is it helps to offset the amount of additional money that they're still paying the airport. So, as I said, that's something we've brought before you several times. It requires the compliance for all the state laws as well as the city ordinance, and it also talks about the grant assurances. If we look at rate charges, everybody knows that the airport operates on rates and charges. The new AUA continues to be what we call the hybrid method. So our airfield is residual. What that means is that the airlines are responsible for 100% of the cost of the airfield. So whatever it cost us to operate, we divide by the landed weight of the airplane, and they pay that landing fee. On the terminal rental rate, it's compensatory. What that means is that, if there is additional monies to operate it, some of the revenues that come into the airport also go into their rate base. So we've got a really good story to tell on that in just a little bit, where we're going to be getting additional revenues to the airport. The rate methodology for this year allows for larger deposits into our development fund. Currently, we are getting 6%. You'll see on a graph here in just a little bit, where every year over the 5 years of this agreement, we get a 1% or 2% increase. So ultimately, we're getting 11% of those non-aeronautical revenues, which are coming back into the airport to build up our development fund. Allocation of the additional requirement back to the terminals. What that means today is the airlines are making an additional requirement to the airport to operate of about $15 million a year. They wanted half of that to go toward the cost of the landing fee and half of that to go toward the cost of their terminal rental rates. We have said for a long time our terminal rental rates are very competitive and low. Our landing fees have been higher, and we really wanted to put 100% of that allocation back into the terminal, and with this agreement we're able to do that. What that means is our landing fees will start coming down substantially, which is something that I think is recognizable by a lot of people. So at the end of the day, it's the same amount of money, but it's how it's allocated. And the future rates are expected to continue to lower, and if you take a look at the next graph, I think this is probably the storytelling of this use and lease agreement. If you take, airlines operate on a presumption of what is their CPE, their cost per enplanement by airport. So they don't necessarily look at the terminal rental rate or at the landing fee. They look at their CPE, the total cost of enplanement. And that CPE is driven by all of these things. So our goal of this was to lower our CPE. And so if you take a look at our landing fee rate, which is the very light blue line at the bottom, you can see where this past year we were just above $8. In this new one, this year we set our rate for $7.95, and that's continuing. The projection is continuing to see it go down, which is a very good story. If you take a look at the Terminal 1 rental rates, which is the dark maroon line, those two are going substantially down this year. Our terminal rental rate is already very competitive at a $55 or $57 a rate. You're seeing a lot of airports that are paying $100 or $20 per square foot. So we're very competitive in our rental rates, but that's continuing to go down. There are separate rental rates for Terminal 1 and Terminal 2, so the lighter pink line is the Terminal 2 rental rates. That's obviously where our largest carrier, Southwest, is operating. Again, their rental rates are going down. And that's with improvements being made into both terminals. So we're putting money into the terminals, but we're continuing to see, because of the additional revenues coming into the airport, we're continuing to see those rental rates go low. And then the top line, the blue line, which is what we call our CPE, the cost per in-plane passenger, which is really what the industry looks at. You can see that today, we're just shy of $14. That is starting to come down. And over the use and lease of this 5-year agreement, we will get down where we're about at a $10.50 rate. That would put us more in the bottom third of where airports in the country are relative to a CPE. So that's important. It's critical for us. One of the things we've continued to do and that we've been very successful with the airlines is promising that we would continue to manage the airport smartly and try to drive non-aeronautical revenues so that their rates would continue to be lower. They are very happy. When we showed this chart, it made our negotiations, and Mario, like I said, who led the team, was a much easier negotiation this time looking at the numbers going in. Flexibility was important to us. We were pretty restricted in this last year, in this last 5-year use and lease agreement, just because of the financial stability of the airport. We've obviously shaped that in a much different outlook going forward, so we wanted more flexibility. The next page talks about that flexibility. As I said, they pre-approved for the first time a 5-year capital improvement that has over 100 projects. We have more discretion of how we use the money in our airport development fund. Today, when the balance dropped below 20 million, all projects that were over $100,000 had to be approved by the air carriers before we could do them. In the new use and lease agreement, this additional revenue that we're gonna get from taking a larger percentage of the non-aeronauticals, which is parking and concessions, we expect to add about $10.4 million in the life of this contract. None of that new revenue, they have any say-so in how the airport spends. It's 100% at the discretion of the airport and our team as to how to do that. We also have higher thresholds for the capital outlay. Today, our current cap is $100,000 without going to them. Going forward, that's going to be $200,000. So when you talk about equipment at the airport, you know, there's not much that we buy that's under $100,000. So today we have to go to them every time we need something. If something breaks or, you know, HVAC goes out or anything, we're constantly going to them to get MII. This raises that to $200,000. The other flexibility that we got is once they approve a project, we have currently in the use and lease agreement, we have a 10% threshold, which means if the project exceeds more than 10% of what it was budgeted at, we have to go back to them for reapproval. Now we have that up to 25%. So obviously we still have to meet the regulations of our ordinances and what was approved in the ordinances, but this gives us the flexibility not to have to go back unless we're exceeding 25%. And then also within those 5-year CIP, if there's similar projects that over the 5 years we choose to substitute out, and as long as we stay within the money that was allocated, we do not have to go back to them for substitutions. So some pretty nice flexibility. The next page shows our graph of our airport development fund. So if you look today, currently what we were getting in the past use and lease agreement was 6% a year. Again, that's the non-aeronautical revenues. So as we take in parking revenues, as we take in concession revenues, revenues from our ground transportation, I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting anything.
I mean, all the ground transportation, the revenues from parking, concessions, anything.
Our little
Lease.
vendings, our vending
Yeah.
machines, anything like that. So parking, concessions, and ground transportation are the three big ones. But going forward, in this new lease and use agreement, we're gonna get 7% starting July 1. Starting in July of 18, we're gonna go to 9%. In 19, we're gonna go up to 10. In 2020, we're gonna go up to 11, and then we'll stay. So the projection is today that our development fund is gonna go up about $10.5 million. And that is with putting in all the projects that we've pre-funded. So within that, saying that we're gonna get $10.5 million on the projects and the capital improvement where we have the matching funds that comes out of the development, we've calculated all of that in there. So it's a net $10.5 million added to our balance after all the funding is also been allocated. So a pretty nice look there going forward. And our hope would be, as we negotiate in 5 years, that we even get a larger percentage of that revenue. If you take a look at our debt service coverage, certainly something that's in the indentures of our bonds that are outstanding, of our debts, we barely had been meeting the 1.25. So every year we were struggling to meet it. We had been meeting it, but we were really at that point of struggling. As you can see here, our debt ratio coverage is gonna be quite above what is required. So from a comptroller standpoint, she's extremely excited about that. Certainly from our rating agencies, when we go to our rating agencies, they look at that and say, oh wow, this is a really nice financial stability. So we're in good shape with our debt service coverage as well. The signatory airlines, as I said, they're gonna have to pay $1 million in landing fees regardless of their activity. That's the commitment that they make. They also have to ensure that they pay enough fees so that we meet our airport and trust indenture obligations. That's where some of that additional monies comes from. Carol?
Is that million annually?
No, it is over the 5-year use and lease
Over
agreement.
the 5,
Right.
so in other words, if they don't have that, they will pay $1 million
Over the life of that
over the
agreement.
life of it.
And a
And how
carrier-
does that, how is that, in other words, is that annually they're looked at and they pay a portion of that if they don't meet?
Right, well, it's prorated over the 5 years. Now, carriers like Southwest will meet that in the first
Right,
year.
right.
But you have other carriers like a United, which is a smaller operator, or an Air Choice One, or a Cape Air, which it may actually take them 5 years to meet
build
that.
their-
They calculate very closely, if we're gonna be here 5 years, and, you know, what is our landing fee gonna be? Because the smaller the airplane, the less the landing fee is. So, all of the carriers look at that, and like I said, Southwest will meet that in the first month. But for the other carriers that have a much less operation, it may take them the complete 5 years. But if any time during that 5 years they left and walked away, they would have to pay us the balance at that time.
So if they have more flights,
Uh-huh.
will they exceed that
Oh,
sometimes?
yeah, oh, yeah,
okay,
oh, yeah,
all right,
oh, yeah.
All right,
okay, I'm sorry.
you
No.
finish up and then we'll go around. the
Okay,
room.
that's
Okay,
fine.
I just,
That's okay, it is interesting.
For the signatory carriers, if you choose not to be signatory, and these are carriers that like operate charters, or maybe they fly in 1 day a week, and they say, well, we really don't wanna be signatory because we don't wanna commit to that million, they pay a 25% premium on their landing fee. So for anybody who chooses to operate in St. Louis and not be a signatory carrier, they're gonna pay a 25% premium. The certain projects over $200,000 net, the MII approval, again, we talked about that, but the airlines do get to approve any project outside of that CIP that we've already pre-approved. Any additional project that's going forward that we decide we have to do that comes up, they get to approve over $200,000. They review and comment, they don't approve, but every year we present them with our maintenance and operation budget. So they don't have approval rights of it, but they do get to review it, and we go through in great detail. That's done by Antonio. We sit down as a group with them, bring them all in, and walk through what our costs are going to be. They get to participate in the annual setting process. So again, Antonio sits down, we go through what we anticipate our rates are gonna be for this year, how we've calculated them, walk them through it. They don't have approval rights again of that, but they do get an opportunity to comment to us and raise questions or ask questions and concerns. Today, they can't handle other airlines. We have, in this new use and leasing growing forward, we wanted to be flexible. So they can handle themselves and they can handle their affiliates, but a United couldn't be handled by American. We left that to our charter, not our charter operator, our city operator, which is Airport Terminal Services, in order to give more flexibility and to hopefully try to open up that door to attract more carriers in. Other airlines can handle other airlines now. They designate their affiliates. Sometimes carriers like a Delta may have 3 or 4 affiliates that fly under the Delta share, or United may have 3 or 4. So they designate, and they can do that currently. And then if they are a signatory carrier and they've proven that they pay their bills consistently, they can qualify for the security deposit waiver. That's really for airlines that come in once a week, once a month. Periodically, we require them to have a security deposit, so if we don't get it paid, we've got a way to pull that money. The accomplishments that we felt out of this, that we set goals on trying to lay out when we first started the negotiations, was that we wanted to make us more competitive. We wanted both our landing fee rate to be lower, to continue to lower our terminal rentals, and then have that cost per enplaned passenger really stand a strong statement within the industry. And that's going to happen with this agreement. We think it ensures that fair cost for all the use of the facilities is allocated fairly. So when we have that additional requirement that we come back for, and eventually that is going to go away. We're still going to be needing that transfer of that money during this use and lease agreement. But that we're getting to, by the end of this agreement, where we actually, there will not be an additional requirement for the airlines. It reduces hurdles to entry. What this is we continue to try to grow the base out of St. Louis. And what's custom among the industry is that you pay a 80% of the common use space. So you lease your gate space, you lease whatever office space you have, and you pay those applicable rates. But common use space is an 80-20 allocation. So if you're a carrier that operates maybe like the Cape Air or the Air Choice One, or maybe a carrier like Alaska, which is only operating 3 flights, you're paying a higher percentage of that common use rate because you're not at 20% of the operation. So, and this was a lot of negotiation. Mario did a great job on this one. But what we asked them to do was said, we don't want to hamper people from coming in here because of the common use rate being high. Even though that's what it is across the board at most airlines, you're seeing some of the new agreements come in with creative ways to try and give some options. What we said is if you have less than 3% of the total enplaned passengers at Lambert, we're gonna lump you into a pool. And then as a pool, you pay the 20% versus as an individual airline paying that 20%. So that helps carriers. As I said, Alaska's very excited about that because they're under the 3%, so they can lump in with the Cape Airs or the Air Choice One, which are smaller number of enplanements because of the size of their airplanes, and it's a way for them to get their foot in the door, get themselves marketed in the region, and as they grow, then hopefully they grow themselves out of this. But it's a nice win for them. It increases the flexibility in the administration of the capital projects. As I said, if we decide to change a project in that 5-year, $170 million, as long as we stay within the budget, we do not have to go back to them to change those out in this new agreement. It increases our deposits, as we've talked about, into our development fund. And we think for the airport, we really have the financial stability going forward for the next 5 years. So here's where we're at on the status and approval. The last meeting with the airlines was in December, was when we came to an agreement. In January, we sent it for the final review to all of the airlines and their approval. The requested date that we had back for all of the airlines was March 15th. We've had all of them back except for one, which is American, and the process has to go to their board, which their board has had a lot going on with the merger, and so we should have that here shortly. We took it to the Airport Commission on April the 6th. We took it to E&A on April the 20th. We're here today in front of you. The Board of Alderman approval, final one should come on May 20th. May 24th is the mayor's approval. The execution of the agreements we anticipate on June 6th, and then the effective date would be July 1. So that is in a nutshell. Obviously, there's a lot to the agreement, but we tried to highlight, we tried to show the things that we thought were important. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have, either about the new one going forward or anything about the current one that we didn't cover. Just one other point I should make is that from a revenue standpoint, we opened in May of last year, so not quite a year yet. We opened Lot E at Terminal 2, so 240 additional spaces of surface parking. That revenue is coming in extremely strong. So that was all new revenue found to the airport. That lot's gonna generate in excess of $1 million a year itself. Again, because of the new increases that we get, we're gonna get a larger percentage of those revenues coming into our development fund. If we take a look at our restaurant from the food and beverage. Those concessions are also coming in very strong. We opened the Vino Volo restaurant. We added the Mike Shannon's, that was a redo of a restaurant. But totally new concepts was the Vino Volo, we got the Ted Drew's machines, what else was
Right,
there?
the Vino Volo, the Mike Shannon's, and I think that's for the totally new side, but they're getting ready to redo
Right.
quite a few of the restaurants.
So we've seen, with the increase of restaurants, we've seen our revenues go stronger as there as well. We, last week, 2 weeks ago, we opened 2 new gates in Terminal 2, so we came around that bend. So we opened gates E31 and E33. Southwest, those are their gates. They put about $2 million in, they purchased the bridges themselves. They want their own bridges, so they buy their own bridges. They purchased those for about $2 million. We did some upgrades to the facilities. We put new tile in. We did a bunch of painting. We upgraded the restrooms down there. That goes back into their rate base in their agreement in Terminal 2, so that goes back into their terminal rental rate. They also put in the gate hold area, they put in new chairs, new carpet, new charging stations. So we, in addition to that, added a new kiosk from Hudson, which is our vendor that has the news and gifts. So we'll see additional revenues come from that. We also are adding a temporary restaurant there, which we hope will open in the next 10 to
Next 10 days,
next 10 days.
15.
To service those customers, but we're also gonna do a long-term restaurant venue down there as well. So we've asked Host to give us a proposal. If we're not satisfied with that proposal, we'll put out an RFP for a new long-term restaurant there. So we're continuing to build that revenue base, and which is important because as we get a larger percentage of those revenues, the more that we can do that. And none of these was figured into, when we looked at that 10.4 million trying to estimate, we only took revenues we're getting today. We didn't even build on that to estimate, so they're very conservative. We think that number will actually be much higher. We did the same thing with the number of employments going forward. We looked at about a 2% increase of employments. Lately, if you've watched the news with the added markets that we've had, the first quarter, we're up over 10% year over year, and we had a strong quarter last year. So our employments are continuing to grow. If you look at our connecting traffic, we are now at 18.5%. So that number is also, that's with a lot of the new markets Southwest is adding, it's bringing in connecting passengers. So the Des Moines, the Wichitas of the world, the Clevelands, the Pittsburgh, the Little Rocks, Southwest is flowing any of their passengers from their east or their West Coast Texas market. They're flowing them through St. Louis. They've pulled those out of Midway. So with that, we've got those passengers coming in, which is driving the revenue as well. So it's kind of that good, perfect storm where we're seeing the revenues grow. We are seeing the airlines very happy with being able to come in with lower cost here. So I think moving forward, if the industry stays intact and there's no disasters, you should see some probably more favorable results than what we've even shared here, because we did base this very conservatively.
Good. Alderman Vaccaro, any questions?
Not really, no. I know.
You okay?
Yeah, but we had talked,
We
no,
chatted a little
we
bit.
had talked, we talked before, and then I was around the last time we did that, so I get it.
You're okay, all right,
I
fine.
understand this.
I do have a couple questions about the 170 million for capital improvements. So is each one of the airline, how is that funded, the 170 million?
There is, it's funded a number of ways. So a good portion of that, of the 170 million, Antonio, did we bring that sheet? Some of that is federal funding. So I believe we had 73 million. Do you remember the exact number? I think it was 73 million, and I'll email that to the chairwoman so she can pass it out, will come from federal funding. Our matches, the 25% matches on that will come from the ADF. And then the rest is built into the budget overall as we look at our expenses for the year. So some of the capital
So
outlays.
are the airlines putting in like that 25% match they're putting into the ADF, the
No,
development fund,
the
or-
25% that we're required on the federal match of the like the taxiways and things of that nature, that's gonna come out of our ADF. Remember, we're increasing the amount of revenue
Right.
into the ADF. Some of the stuff is in the operating budget, which comes out of our overall operation, so if we're buying some new equipment, you know, they are paying that back basically through the whole rates and charge basis. But the 25% match that we have comes out of the ADF on those funds.
Okay, so when you're, and I know you guys said earlier that you're, with that $10 million net increase in the ADF, that you've already accounted for.
Taking out our 25%.
So the 170 million, I guess is where I'm going with this, is the airlines aren't necessarily contributing to that outside of their normal fee structure.
Right, it's outside, right, they aren't,
Okay.
right, but it does go into their normal fee structure when you look at, so all of these numbers
Right.
that we shared with you already
So, but
built
the
in that
170
170.
isn't up above and beyond what they're already contributing.
That's
It's
correct.
already part of their fee structure, and so, you
That's
know,
correct.
but it'll add to the 10 million net increase to the ADF, which will then use, we already accounted for the 25%
Right.
match in that for the capital improvements.
Right. And I think
Okay.
what's important, you know, they could have said no to this 170 million and kept their rates even lower.
Mhm.
But, you know, our argument was, we need to reinvest now in the airport. There are things we need to do. You know, for a long time, we operated just by getting by because we needed to out of necessity. So, and they agreed, they looked at it going forward and said, you know, there's a lot of these projects, you know, it's not just taxiway and, I mean, there's all sorts of projects in there. And what they said is, we're willing to allow you to build that into your operating base, which, you know, they pay for out of their rates and lease. So they were willing to say, we'll approve this $170 million. Cause at the end of the day, they do pay for it outside of the federal funding.
Do they receive a list of the projects?
Oh, yes,
that
they had to
we're
approve them. We
reviewing?
went through, one by one, and we are happy to share that. Antonio, you have that with you? But yes, they went through, Jerry Beckman, was the kind of keeper of that project. So they went through every single piece of equipment that we're gonna be buying, every single, you know, runway project that we'll be doing. There were parking, reduced to some of the parking lots. I mean, there's just all sorts of projects. You got
These
to-
lists is actually in your
Oh, it is,
attachment A.
And here.
Exhibit A.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Over here.
So yes, they approved that list project by project.
Okay,
And there were a couple projects we took off that list, that they had heartburn with, and, you know, at the end of the day, we felt like 100 projects, if all we're taking out is 2, we did pretty well.
yeah, absolutely.
So-
So I have 2 other questions, if you can indulge me, Madam Chairwoman. So the graph in here, you know, where we're reducing the CPE, what steps are we taking behind the scenes to reduce our costs to pass along, you know,
Savings.
lower, yeah. So what are we doing as an airport to provide for savings on the airline's end?
Right, a lot of it has to do with some of the development that we're working on. So the fact that we are getting more airplanes landed, our seats out of St. Louis is gonna be up about 10%, starting this fiscal year versus last fiscal year. So what that means is you are collecting a passenger facility charge from everybody, so we're growing that base. The airplanes are also larger airplanes, so they're heavier weighted landings. So what that means is, as more landed weights coming in, then their cost is lowering on that end as well. So we're driving, you know, hopefully a sustainable airport that people want to come here. That's one piece. The other piece is some of the stuff that we're doing relative to the development. So, you know, we opened up JetLinks last year, which was a new development on the field. We opened up Spire, which was a new development on the field. We get revenues from both of those as well as lease payments. We've got the development agreement underway. We'll be actually bringing that tomorrow to the, for an amendment to that, to add a little bit more property to that. So the developer that we have for the cargo facility, that's ultimately gonna generate some nice revenues. We built, again, very, very conservative into our projections out of that. We're working with a developer right now on corporate hangars as well. We are hopeful that that will come forward sometime here in the next 4 to 5 months. That would also come before you as a group. That would be for basically another private investor to come in and build corporate hangars. We have people knocking at the doors wanting to put hangars at our airport, and or put airplanes, and we don't have any hangars. So all of those projects that we're working on helps to also bring in revenue. again, we showed a very, very slight, projection on that. We think it'll be substantially higher, than what we projected, but the airlines see that we're bringing in other sources of revenue to the airport.
And if I could just add, you know, we also have a cost containment structure at the airport. Our budget relatively remains flat. If there's any kind of increase in the budget, you have to come to us with a good explanation on why you want to have an increase in your budget. So we're relatively remain flat, but we're also aggressively looking at like energy efficiency studies. So we have energy efficiency studies that have been performed at the airport. We're attacking some of those ideals to decrease some of our O&M expenses. And then also we're taking advantage of any kind of rebates or incentives that the utility companies offer, like Ameren has a pretty aggressive energy efficiency item in place, and we take advantage of that very well.
Last year, our check totaled $450,000 rebate from Ameren over a 12-month period. So it was nice.
And then my last question, so going back to the timeline, so American is the only airline that hasn't signed on to this?
For the signatories,
For-
yes.
At this point, we're expecting them to do so.
Yes,
But are we able to pass this out of the Board of Aldermen without their signature? I mean, that's more of
Yes.
a legal issue, I suppose.
yes,
like a
because
legal
we
question.
have, yes. I mean,
Okay.
we can pass it even without their signature.
Mhm.
If they choose, if for any reason, and they wouldn't, but if for any reason we didn't have their signature by July 1, then they have to pay the upcharge. So that 25%
Okay.
on those, and now that they're merged with US Air, they're operating the second largest carrier, so they're about 80 flights a day. They're not gonna pay that upcharge. So we'll have it. It's just going through their process. We're also in the process, they also have a hangar lease that's independent of this, that expires June 30th. So, we're in the process of renegotiating that as well. So we'll probably have to go on a month-to-month for a little bit until we do a hangar lease with them. And if that's a long-term lease, that too would come forward. So, they're committed to staying and they want the hangar lease for a longer term. So, but we're negotiating through that too.
Okay.
They're just slow in their processes.
Okay, great, that's all I have. Thank you.
So you're not worried about American?
No,
Okay. Are they using the hangar lease as leverage, or is this for leverage for the
No,
hangar lease?
no,
This is
totally
just
independent.
bureaucratic
Right.
stuff?
Right, so, we said to them, I can lease that hangar tomorrow, so we expect,
Yeah, chop chop.
yeah, if you don't, we had our little meeting yesterday and said it's time to send a nasty letter and say, fine, July 1, I can lease this hangar and I've got plenty of people waiting, so let's start moving.
Okay. Alderman Howard?
I have no questions.
I have a couple of questions, Rhonda.
Okay.
170 million capital improvement program over this next 5 years. How does that compare with what we've spent in capital over the last 5 years?
This is probably about a 63% increase.
So we can expect to see some good stuff. Now, is a lot of these capital improvement items are
Some are not-
equipment, right?
Right,
We
some
might
are
not see
equipment,
them. Mhm.
some are infrastructure to the roadways. One
I
of the
see you're
things-
gonna close something here pretty soon. I
Yeah,
just saw that, right?
Yeah, starting this week. So we have to redo the bridge that goes over what we call the LIB, Lambert International Boulevard. That bridge is reaching a
Not
point
good.
where it's gotta be replaced. And so, the work is starting now because we have to go on each side of the roadway during this 10-month construction or
Mhm.
12-month construction. And we're gonna have to go down to a single lane on each one. So we're starting to put additional U lanes in and stuff, which is happening right now. Come June 20th, is when we'll actually see that go down to one lane. We'll continue to do press releases on that so the public's aware. But some of the buildings, the outer buildings, like if you exit the airport from either level, the upper or the lower level, and you're exiting the airport, you see there's two buildings on the right-hand side where our climate shop and our HVAC system are. The windows in those buildings, they just look atrocious. We're replacing all of those, trying to upgrade some of the workers' facilities that we have, which are in dire need and stuff that we just haven't been able to do. There's, as I said, there's some additional work to the parking lots over the life of this during the CIP. There's a number of things that will help both from an aesthetic standpoint, but will certainly help from an infrastructure standpoint.
But an additional 60% more in capital improvements coming this next 5 years as compared with the last 5 years, so hopefully that's good. This $14 cost per plane passenger
Currently.
currently, headed down to 11, you're hoping, or
Actually,
you know,
about 10.50, yeah.
Right. How does that compare with other airlines or other folks that we wanna be competitive with? Is it still kinda high, or?
No,
Do I
it'll
have
be very
that?
competitive. I didn't hand this out. So today, the cost per plane passenger, if you look at this graph here,
Yep.
and this compares, there's, how many airports are in here? Probably 20, 25, I would say, airports that we compare ourselves. Today, here's where our CP is, this
Okay,
orange line.
mhm.
So if we get to 10.50, we will be in the bottom.
Okay, yeah, we don't
And-
have that.
Yeah,
We don't have that piece, I don't think.
So I'm happy to pass that around, just for you
Yeah.
to look at, and I could certainly share that as well.
Sure.
But what you're also seeing, as I said, is now a lot of other carriers, CPE is starting to go up.
It is
So-
starting to go up?
So the other carriers, other airports.
Yeah.
So you're certainly seeing some increases there. Ours is coming down, and we're adding infrastructure,
Right.
so that piece is exciting for us.
And do you think that does that really drive, takeoffs and landings at Lambert, or, I mean, we
It's a
all want
factor
more
of,
flights. Yeah, we
It's-
all want more flights, we want more direct flights, we want a flight to London, we want, you know, all those kinds of things.
Right.
And this is just a piece of it, I guess.
It is a piece, if you take a look, of the CPE, landing fee is 3% of an airline's cost. So
Okay.
that's the landing fee. If you take a CPE, both their landing fee and their rental rate, still as a whole, that's maybe 6% of their total cost. So it is a factor. What's gonna drive that, are there enough passengers
Right.
to make sense for this flight, and can they drive a high enough yield? What is exciting for us, and we see it, Southwest right now is the one adding most of the flights. Obviously, Alaska added Portland as a market too, which is exciting. But we've seen American, Delta, and United, and Frontier all up-gauge the size of their aircraft. So, and they're full. Our load factor is about 5% stronger year over year. So last year, we were running about a 70% load factor, 76%.
Every plane that went out of here on average was 76%
Right.
full.
And now that's 82.
Okay.
So we're doing very well. What we're also seeing, which I think is encouraging, and we're gonna hope that it works for Southwest, but, where we had become almost a 90% local market and just a 10% connecting, Southwest believes with their network, they can get that market up. So I think the goal is to get their market only, not the total airport,
Mhm.
but their market to a 70-30, and right now they're at about 19%.
Mhm.
So with the growth of these markets that they've been adding, there's only about 30% local traffic on those. They're looking at these markets as funneling about 70%. So that's not stealing traffic from one airline to another, that's a
Right.
growth of new traffic.
Mhm.
So that piece is important, and if that's a success story for them, which we hope it will be, I think there's probably, not 50 more markets, but I think there's another 5 or 6 markets that makes sense,
Mhm.
that we currently don't have, that they could add over the next 12 to 18 months.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Anyone else have any questions? Carol?
I guess you brought up the point, what is the tipping point for us to be getting international flights rather than this, you fly from here to Chicago
Right.
and then, or, these little, we gotta go to an international
Right.
airport. What is the tipping point for us to become again an international airport?
We have a lot of discussions going on right now, and the new airplane that's flying, whether it's the A330 or whether it is the new 787, both of those are about 220 seat airplanes that can go across the pond and that have the dual aisle. They're not the single 757 aisle, which is an ugly flight. With those new airplanes that both carriers like BA and Lufthansa are taking on, they look at more the medium hub markets versus just the mega hubs. That's what Austin got 2 years ago. San Jose got it last year. We know we're on the short list. When we say a short list, that's 3 to 4 carriers. Both of them have said that they don't know whether or not this year they're gonna be adding the market for next summer in the US, but they're looking at it. So I think the tipping point, what they keep telling us is our number is strong. It's about 300 a day average to go all throughout Europe. So not to one particular destination, but all throughout Europe. That number is strong. What they have to see yet is the GDP growth in the St. Louis region. So they look at if this flight's gonna be sustainable and we're gonna invest money into that route, then we wanna know what the market's doing in St. Louis. And what they keep telling us right now is our GDP just isn't as strong as markets like in Nashville or markets like in Austin. And so they're looking for that. They're looking for that
For that
GDP.
economic.
For that, right, and it's per capita. So,
Okay.
you know, our GDP is strong if we take a look at it kind of as the region, but they look at it per capita. Is it gonna drive people?
People to fly to
Yeah.
Europe, yeah.
And
Which
when you
all
look
comes
at it
back
per
to
capita,
jobs.
Right.
we're a little ways behind. So, you know, we are on the radar. I think they're all looking at us. You know, the more we can do as a region to grow that GDP per capita, I think we've had some good announcements this year. So we're hoping that, you know, some of that will hopefully boost that decision. So it's not a number, Alderman, it's just, you know, it's looking at,
The market
Yeah.
and the number of flights.
right, as a
and that-
whole.
Yeah, okay.
They're not really looking at our economy,
They are.
Yeah.
our local economy, and
Right.
whether or not we're gonna.
And maybe NGA will,
Well, that's,
a
we're
good
hoping,
Give
and
us
you know, there's
that.
been some nice announcements, so, you know, we're seeing some of the, obviously, you know, you've got a couple of things like Peabody, which is,
Mhm.
which is a little
Right,
bit different, but
negative,
we
yeah.
have other markets growing, like the Monsanto or RGA is growing. You know, Boeing's had some good announcements lately where they feel like they're gonna have that stability, so.
Okay,
thank you.
any other questions?
I just, Rhonda, you brought up, you know, like airlines are looking at the CPE, you know, in terms of, you know, how they're, I guess, looking at costs, you know, in airports.
Right.
But then you just said that like the landing fees account for 26% of an airline's.
No, 3%,
Oh, okay.
3%.
Okay. Because
The landing fees are 3%.
I'm looking at the landing fee
Yeah.
structure on this chart, and
Yeah.
we're like number 3,
Right.
and
Yeah.
even if we get down to the $7, we're still in the top 5.
Yeah, but what you're seeing is,
So, you know, like the cost per employment,
Right.
you know, will go down into the bottom third,
Right.
but we'd still,
Be
you know,
high on the landing
we'd still
fee,
be
yeah.
very high on the landing fee. And I just still have stuck in my head, the St. Louis Business Journal had the front page article about St. Louis, you know, being the, you know, third largest, you know, in terms of cost with landing fees and whatnot.
that's because
So-
they never look at the whole picture.
well, yeah, you're talking to a room full of politicians, I'm sure we understand the media. Yeah, so it's good to know that, like, the cost per unplanned passenger is actually what, you know, the airlines are looking at, and, that we'll be significantly reducing, you know, the amount that we're passing on.
Here's a good example. The landing fee in Indianapolis is about $2.20. Their terminal rental rate's $110. Ours are $55.
Yeah,
In Midway, the terminal rental rate's $130. Their landing fee's more like $4.50. So you can't, that's why we've been trying to tell people, you can't look at one without the other. You have to look at that CPE. That's what the airlines look at.
right.
It's just an easy thing to kind of target. Not that we don't want it to be lower, obviously we are trying to. And what's the strange thing in airports is the landing fee goes down, more airplanes and heavier weights. Well, that's less revenue to the airport. So as you're bringing the landing fee down, you're bringing in less revenue because you're charging less for the landing fee. So you wanna make sure that you're getting revenues in other areas to offset that, like the parking or the concessions, because, you know, that's gonna mean less revenue to the airport as the landing fee goes down.
So how is the airport communicating that out to the general public, you know, so that they understand that we're actually, you know, a cost efficient,
Right.
you know, provider for the airlines, you know, and, cause I get a lot of phone calls, you know, people walk through the airport, they've seen a lot of great improvements as of late, but, you know, they still, you know, see it as kind of this empty space, not as many passengers as there used to be, kind of a thing, and then they see an article like that in the Business Journal, and they're like, well, you know, just reduce the, you know, landing fee, and it's like, well, you know, it's not that easy. So, are we doing anything to communicate that we are, you know, a low-cost service provider, you know, to the airlines to recruit them here?
I think once we have this approved, you know, I have been making and will continue to make presentations to the Regional Business Council, to Civic Progress, and to the Regional Chamber. So once this use and lease agreement is through all the legislative process, I'll make this same presentation at the board meetings for those three.
Mhm.
So that at least touches the business community and they understand. You know, I think a lot of, when you talk about the general public, you know, we've talked about, does it make sense to try to go to either the Post or to the Business Journal and have them write the good story? And I guess, you know, it's always that balance of, will they write the factual story? And, you know, we can do that. I mean, we can talk more about that and see if we think that's got value to it. We do a lot of speaking presentations, and I've got all the deputies out doing them now as well. So we talk to lots of small, you know, when I talk to the Rotaries, we talk to a lot of the smaller, not just the large organizations. And, you know, we make very similar presentations. We show our debt payment slide and how last year was our peak debt payment year, and that's continuing to go down as well. So we show a lot of these graphs to the smaller groups like that. You know, I really believe, you know, every conversation one-on-one helps.
Mhm.
Everybody has to take one more flight a year.
Yes, there you go.
Boiled it
Yeah.
down.
But, you know, if you have suggestions on that, we're happy to listen to them. If you have community neighborhood meetings and you want us to come talk to them, we're
Well, I
happy to do
mean,
that.
you know, I don't know if going to neighborhood meetings is the answer, but, you know, I definitely, like, the Business Journal in particular, because we do have a lot of business class travelers that are coming in and out of the airport. And when they see stuff like that and then they go to the airport and they don't see as many, you know, airlines, or they don't see as many flights going out, or they don't see as many passengers coming in, you know, it's just kind of compounding like this perception issue. And so, you know, I think the Business Journal in particular would be, you know, a good outlet for communicating the success that the airport has seen, and particularly as we're embarking on a $178 million reinvestment in the airport, let people know, you know, that some of those things aren't things that you're gonna be able to see,
Right.
you know, but they're
They're infrastructure,
$170
yeah.
million worth of improvements that we're making at the airport. I think we've done a really great job at improving what you do see at the airport, you know, the new roof, the new lighting, the art program, all of that is wonderful, but I just feel like, you know, people need to have a better understanding that the airport is financially stable, it's solvent, it's an asset, you know, to the city, to the region, and, you know, that we are in a good place. So, I guess I can follow up offline with you about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and we'll
'cause-
talk about that.
Yeah.
We'll, you know, we'll talk, I think, to, obviously I'll check with the mayor about that, and
Yeah.
we'll talk to the commission about it and see if we all feel that that's a good way to, once we've got this all completed, you know, we wouldn't do it until we had all the signed
Right.
approvals, but, you know, taking a shot at maybe trying to do an article in the paper.
Mhm. Cool.
Okay. Care to make a motion?
I moved that we pass board bill number 2 out with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Vaquero,
Yes, aye.
Alderman Cone,
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard,
Aye.
Chairwoman Krewson.
Aye.
We have 4 ayes and 0 noes.
So Board Bill 2 passes out with a due pass recommendation.
7.
Thank
On to
you,
the full board.
thank you.
Thank you, thanks for coming.
Do you wanna keep these for the members that aren't here today, Lyda?
Yeah, that'd be fine. That would be fine, yeah.
Then I will,
Does anybody want these? And you're welcome to take them, or we
I
save
might
a
just
tree and
look
give
at
them
'em.
back so they
yeah.
can take them to the next
Whatever
meeting.
works, we just
Yeah.
wanted to show you the spaces that
Yeah.
everybody had.
I'll leave.
I don't need any more
If you
paper.
leave them here, we'll-
I'm walking
They'll
out with
what?
an armful
We'll,
of paper anyway.
Shred 'em.
no, we'll take care of it.
Okay.
We're gonna
I'll
take
just
all
put the
the
note in there and go.
Hey, Brian.
Probably communicate.
We're
What's
adjourned.
that?
We're
Well,
adjourned.
maybe I'll give you a
Do
copy.
we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Aye.
All in favor?
Previous roll.
Previous roll, thank you.